So hello again, everybody. My name is Rebecca Missel, and I am the Director of Partnerships at Haggadah.com. I am delighted to welcome you here tonight. We are joined by Rabbi Arthur Waskow and Rabbi Phyllis Berman from the Shalom Center. Rabbi Phyllis Berman was ordained by the Jewish Renewal Movement in 2005 in a 5-woman smicha ceremony. She serves as spiritual companion for students in the Aleph Ordination Program and is the co-editor of the Liberating Your Passover Seder, which is an anthology bringing together 50 years of wisdom and reflection about the Freedom Seder. And Rabbi Arthur Waskow founded and directs the Shalom Center. He has written or edited 28 books, including the original 1969 Freedom Seder, Seasons of Joy, and Dancing in God's Earthquake, as well as a number of other books that we're going to hear about tonight. And he co-lives, co-learns, co-authors, and co-teaches with Rabbi Berman, who he says is the key to his life. And we're delighted to welcome you both. We are also joined here tonight by Haggadah.com's community manager, Rin Silverstein, who is here helping out with tech. I'm going to share just a quick sort of Haggadah.com presentation in case folks are not familiar with us, and then we'll dive into the rest of the program. Bear with me one second. And looks like we've got more folks joining, so good time for a pause anyway. Great. So Haggadah.com is a nonprofit organization that invites every Jewish person, regardless of their background, to find a space for themselves in the Passover story so they may create more meaningful, more personal, and more connective Seders. When you come to our site, you have the ability to create and mix and match a Passover Haggadah, incorporating any different kind of content that speaks to you, including content from the Shalom Center, which we'll share with folks during the presentation and as a follow-up to this webinar. And you can also download ready-made Haggadah. We have everything from social justice to pop culture and everything in between. And we are a project of Custom and Craft Jewish Rituals, which is a nonprofit design lab for the Jewish community, experimenting with technology, media, and videos to imagine new formats for engaging with ancient traditions. And we are a nonprofit organization, and your donations really help us to produce webinars like this tonight with partners like the Shalom Center. So we always appreciate that. And with that, I am going to sort of bring in and give us a little bit of background on our work. So in 1969, for the first time ever, the Freedom Seder connected the ancient story of liberation of the people of Israel from enslavement by Pharaoh with the ongoing story of the liberation struggle of Black Americans against racism. The Freedom Seder opened the door to many new Haggadah and new practices, such as the Freedom Plate on the Seder table. And this year, 2 new Seders celebrate the past and transform the future. And the first of these is the Earth Justice Freedom-Seder, which is sort of the inspiration for our topic tonight, and challenging the corporate carbon pharaohs, as these modern pharaohs bring us plagues of fire, flood, famine, displacement, and disease on both earth and humankind. And the other kind of transformative is a Seder that we're talking about tonight is the Iftar Seder, which brings together Muslims and Jews in this coming month this current month, actually now, I suppose, when the month of Ramadan and the sacred Jewish month of Nisan coincide. And we will be sharing an event with everybody that is going to be using this Haggadah with everyone. Again, we'll put the link in the chat as we go through the evening, and we will share that out with everybody along with the recording from tonight. So with that, I would love to just open it up to Rabbis Berman and Waskow for some questions. We didn't practice who was going to answer which, so I will let you both sort of decide who wants to answer which questions as we go along. And I am going to just spotlight both of you so we can see you and we don't have to look at me while I ask you questions. So you write, this is in some of the, in the sharings of wisdom that you had sent our way. You write that, and I agree, that loving the stranger as yourself is sort of the basic teaching of our Jewish tradition. And I'm curious how that teaching inspired the Iftar Seder, especially, but also the Earth and Justice Freedom-Seder.
So we're both going to answer. I'll start with the Iftar Seder. Arthur will pick up the other one. Out of my long life experience and my interaction with thousands and thousands of people, it seems to me that whatever is the loving that we give to other people outside of ourselves has to be rooted in ourselves. That if people are insecure, if they're uncertain about what they know and what they think and what they feel, if they don't know how to make decisions that really represent their best selves, they're going to take all of that out on everybody else. And it's only when you're grounded yourself, and I don't mean grounded pompously or in any negative sense, having a sense of who you are and being comfortable in the who you are leaves you an awful lot more room to make that contact with other people. So I'm very, we focus so much on the v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, on the l'reacha, the other, the stranger, the neighbor. But I think the place that we need to have as our foundation is kamocha, like yourself.
So the first thing I want to say about love your neighbor is yourself. It's said that some version of that is 36 times in the Torah, and that proves how important the Torah thinks it is. I think that's true. And if I had to tell my own kids something they should be and do 36 times, it wasn't because they were doing it. It was because they weren't doing it. It's a very hard task, especially when you put in the second half of the statement, because you remember what it was like to be strangers oppressed in Egypt. The easiest thing to respond with if you've been oppressed is to oppress somebody else, to feel, I'm going to make sure nobody can ever do that to me again. And in order to do that and be sure about it, you have to push them down. So the question for me has always been, what do we learn really from that? What do we learn about not pressing other people down? I hear the Torah saying, yeah, we know that's your likely response. It's not a good idea. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help them. It doesn't help the world. It doesn't help whatever you think the divine is. So this last, really now half century, some of us have known, and more of us have learned, that the danger of treating the earth as other, as expendable, as subjugatable, is that the earth turns on us. Not surprising. The story of Pharaoh is exactly about that. He thought he could be cruel to human beings and nobody else would mind. And he keeps, when the plagues come, he's first scared. Oh, wow. And then when the plagues go, he relaxes. Like not so long ago, Secretary of Defense of the United States, he says, well, stuff happens. Moses, and Aaron, and Miriam knew that not just stuff happens. There was a pattern. If you're cruel to human beings, you will end up being cruel to the earth, and then the earth will be cruel to you. What you sow is what you reap. And the Bible tells us that over and over again. So here we are with the deepest crisis in all of human history. We have figured out a way to destroy life on the planet by just pouring CO2 into it. This is the way the world ends, said T.S. Eliot. not with a bang, but a whimper. And that's the whimper. So that was at the deepest part of why we need to love the earth. Our ancestors did. The Bible was written by people who were shepherds and farmers, and they loved the earth and they knew how to behave so it would not destroy them. And we need to learn. We are learning from our own native indigenous peoples. But luckily, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, is like a walking treasury of an indigenous people that got saved. Its wisdom got saved. And we ought to be paying attention to it. We are beginning to, but not enough and not fast enough yet.
Well, on that really cheery note to start with, but I appreciate, I think the shaking us awake is super important in this moment. I want to shift a little bit to talking about the Liberating Your Passover Seder, the collection of essays and reflections, and sort of how these writings can sort of help us think about, and just the Passover story broadly can help us access our own personal experiences of moving from slavery into freedom and liberation.
So the book has quite a number of different essays, but one that has impacted us over the last, 20 some odd years came from a woman by the name of Martha Hausman, who talked about a freedom plate alongside the traditional Seder plate. And the freedom plate is an invitation for everyone who comes to Seder, from the youngest child to the oldest person, from the Jewish person knowledgeable in Judaism to a Jewish person not knowledgeable in Judaism, to people who are our guests who come from other traditions. It calls on not knowing in advance anything but your own experience. The Haggadah, the traditional Haggadah, says, in every generation, each of us is called upon to see ourselves as though we ourselves went out in freedom from the tight places in Mitzrayim. And if we looked at the truth of our own lives, in every year, not just in every generation, probably in every day, if we looked at it very closely, we all find ourselves in very tight places with the possibility that we're going to expand to something else. So the Freedom Plate is an invitation for each person to consider what it is that has been that primary experience of the year up until now, and to bring something that symbolizes that experience. And then we go around the table and we invite people to speak about whatever it is that they've brought. The example I think I had sent you, Rebecca, is in our Iftar Seder. And it's an example of a feeling, an experience with somebody that I knew who I had no good time with. This person was hurtful. This person was misunderstanding. This person spoke a different language. And I don't mean not English. I mean, just like a different world from me. And whatever we did, we clashed. There was no way of our letting ourselves into one another's experience. And very, very early on, at the beginning of COVID 2 years ago, and this is a 25-year history, very beginning of COVID, this person wrote something, just a tiny thing in an email, talking about what felt good about being shut down and what felt difficult. It was the most transparent thing that they had ever said to me in all 25 years I'd known them. And it actually was exactly the way I was experiencing it. And for the first time in 25 years, I felt like there was a crack in the world that would let us both connect. So had we had a big Seder that year, I would have put on my Freedom Plate an ice cube, which during the course of the Seder would have melted, because that's what happened inside me. And that's what happened actually inside them. So that's an example.
That's beautiful.
I'd like to tell my favorite story about the Freedom Plate which has all sorts of ambiguous and contradictory wisdom in it. My son, who was then in his late 40s, I guess, came to the Seder and said he had something for the Freedom Plate. And so we went around the room and it came to be his turn. And the idea was that he would lift what was on the Seder plate, on the Freedom Plate. And it came to be his turn and he didn't lift anything. Instead, he looked around the table at us and said, "My father told me to bring something for the Freedom Plate. What I brought for the Freedom Plate was I didn't bring anything for the Freedom Plate." And everybody guffawed, and I, thank God, guffawed. It was his statement of freedom. And it was wonderful to know that I had raised him in such a way that he could say, "No, Dad." And that was a very rich moment to say, "No, Dad," and a very rich use of the Freedom Plate for that matter.
Freedom, I like it, sort of an existentialist freedom from freedom. I like that. So speaking of the original Freedom Seder, would love to talk about, obviously it came about in the context, I did a little bit of research that, it was in response to the assassination of Martin Luther King that happened in early April, about several days ago, it would have been, in 1968. And then, so it came out the following year. And are there lessons that you think are still extremely applicable today? Some that have, changed, what's changed since then, and what's sort of still revolutionary about this book?
Well, the one thing I did not expect at all, I had not faintest glimmer, was that people took it as a signal, a flag, that they can do it too. And that was wonderful. People didn't just, I asked people over and over again, they don't just take the text of the Freedom Seder of 1969. What they do is ask themselves, what is my freedom? Many of them ask, what is our freedom? What are we being denied as a community, as a society, that we need to break loose from? And so thousands of people, if you don't mind my saying so, Haggadah.com wouldn't have existed unless people responded that way. Well, I think of it, it wasn't just me. I think of it as if you have a supersaturated solution and you drop a crystal into it, the whole solution crystallizes. And I think in 1968, 69, the Jewish community, its young people at least, and not just its young people, was a supersaturated solution, needing something profoundly old and profoundly new at the same moment to be serious about Judaism. And I happened to be the one to drop the crystal into the solution. And that was me. I didn't know nothing. When I asked a young rabbi in Washington to tell me what he thought of it, because I was doing something really strange with the writing. I'd written 3 books by that time, but that one felt like it was writing me, and I wasn't really in charge. And I did something I'd never done. I'd read a paragraph and call up one of my friends and read it. Half my friends said, "Waskow, that is amazing, that's wonderful." The other half said, "You can't do that. Nobody can write a Haggadah. There is a Haggadah. Nobody can write one." So I thought I better ask a knowledgeable Jew whether that was just crazy of me, since I didn't know. And I described it and he said, "Well, it sounds interesting anyway, send it to me." So I did. So he called me up a week later. He said, "Well, it's really interesting. It's an activist midrash on the Haggadah. And I wonder whether you happen to have bumped into the story that it was an activist who had to walk into the sea before God was willing to turn it to, break it and let the people walk through. And I said, Midrash, what's that? Midrash? What's a Midrash? And instead of shrugging and turning away and saying, who needs to talk to an ignoramus like you? He said, oh, let me share the Midrash with you. And he did. And I fell in love. First of all, there was the politics of the Seder and the prophets. And secondly, there was this crazy, wonderful notion that you could take a 3,500-year-old text and give it a twirl like a top, and it would come out somewhere new, and it would be able to speak to you in your own generation. And that I could do that. We could do that. It wasn't just ancient rabbis who could do it. They did do it. But we could do it in our own generation. And that was incredible for me. And by the end of another year, I was totally invested in the Jewish enterprise from a radical Jewish perspective, not a conventional one.
As somebody who also, now does this for a living, I'm certainly grateful to you, and also just so grateful to have this tradition that has always, has inspired so many people to spin that top and to be that sort of, mover into coming into new interpretations. I think it's incredibly beautiful. We'll sort of do one more question, and then we'll just sort of say we're going to have some time for folks to be into breakout rooms, and then we'll come back together for some Q&A together with Arthur and Phyllis. I'm curious what advice or wisdom you have for socially and ecologically conscious Jews who are either coming together into Seders this year, or are either whether on Zoom or in person, and sort of how we can bring that ecological mindset and social justice mindset into our 2022 Seders.
Well, first of all, there is now a Seder called the Earth and Justice Freedom-Seder. It's on a website. I put it on the chat. Website called Exodus Alliance, all one word, exodusalliance.org. And you have to look for where it says resources, and then look for where it says action, and then it'll pop up for you. And it's, I would say, quite extraordinary. For one thing, I'm going to jump to a question, right? For one thing, maybe you can put it up on the.
We'll find it. Yep.
Okay. So it begins with a song, and the beginning of the song is now a famous song. I think the first time it ever appeared in a Jewish Haggadah was in the Freedom Seder, because it's from Black tradition, but it's a Black tradition about the Exodus. And it's clear that the Black community was not talking about something 3,500 years ago. They were talking about their own lives and what it would mean to become free from racism. So, not yet. So we took that as a kind of teaching that you can draw on the old and make it really new and about the future. And the worst danger we face now is the danger of destruction of life on the planet because of the climate crisis. Because we figured out how to look. The way the Earth breathes is it exchanges CO2 and oxygen. Human beings breathe in oxygen, breathe out CO2. Plants, and it's not just human beings, it's all animals. All plants breathe in the CO2 and breathe out oxygen. And we keep each other alive by interbreathing. I think the Yud-Hey, Vav-Hey word for God, the name, YHWH, if you try to pronounce it, all you get is a breath. Yeah. There's no vowels. It's not Yahweh, it's not Jehovah. It's just, I think that was maybe the most brilliant thing that ancient Judaism did, was saying, hey, you want a God? A God is just breathing, just breathing. And I think when Moses tried to say that to Pharaoh, he told Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh says who? What God says more than me? I'm a God. The Nile is a God. And Moses just stands there and breathes at him. And Pharaoh says, that's your God? Breathing? Come on. That's not going to win you anything at all. And he doesn't understand what happens to him after that. So we still don't have it. We don't have it.
No, we put the link in there here. I'll put the link, the exact link in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you get it? Can you
Yep.
share it on the
Talking
screen?
about the
Oh,
word.
do you want me to share it on the screen? Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. Yep. We can do that. I'm sorry. I misunderstood. Give me
Yeah.
one quick second.
Okay.
Okay. Let me find the song part. Okay. Found it. Great. Can folks see this? Is this the page you mean, Arthur?
Yes, that's it.
Great.
Okay. Can you get the chat out of the way?
Yeah, that's it. It is.
Oh, on my.
I can't move your screen though. I apologize for that, but I can.
Wait, can I get rid of it? Yeah, okay. So the beginning you'll recognize, right? When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. So I'm going to skip the next several verses, which are from that song. And then I'm going to skip to what the song taught us, which is to tell the old story in a new way. So they're new pharaohs rise to scorch the earth. Let all my peoples go. Be coal and oil, parch new birth. Let all my peoples go. Rise up, peoples, rise up in every land. Tell all pharaohs to let creation grow. For the breath of life still offers hope. Let all my peoples go. With sun and wind, they still can cope. Let all my peoples go. Rise up, peoples, rise up in every land. Tell all pharaohs, let my creation grow. Oh, set all earth from bondage free. Let all my peoples go. Let our making pause to be. Let air and water flow. Rise up, peoples, rise up in every land. Tell all pharaohs, let my creation grow. So that's the meaning of the whole Haggadah, the whole Seder that we wrote. It's directed at the people who fund the big oil and big coal and big unnatural gas. It's directed at big banks, Chase Bank, at BlackRock, a big pool of money, who are funding the arsonists of the only home we have, all of us, the earth. It's directed at them to say, move our money. We invest the money with you. You are putting it in the death of many of us, and maybe even all of us, 1 million species, according to scientists, are at stake. Move the money, protect the planet, prosper our people. That is, turn the money to the service of life, not death. And we're planning to do street seders. Now that's the big step beyond the Freedom Seder. The Freedom Seder was an explanation of the connection of freedom through 3,500 years. But this one says, time to act, time not just to sing, yes to teach, but time also to act. So we're planning, and there are a whole bunch of cities where people have already committed themselves to do this, to appear at a bank and sing the song and wave a matzah and visit inside the bank and give the teller a letter to the head of Chase Bank with a sheet of matzah saying, give him the matzah too. Martin Luther King summed up the meaning of the matzah in just a phrase. He talked about the fierce urgency of now. And the Torah takes just about the same number of words to say, bake the matzah flat. It's flat bread. There's no time to let the bread rise. No time. It's too urgent. Fierce urgency. So that's what we're going to be doing. And you can find the contacts for something near your city, or you can find the Chase Bank in your city. They're almost everywhere.
We have lots
There
here.
are a dozen people or 100 people, and go and chant the song and chant Dainu and chant we have the whole world in our hands. We have frogs and forests in our hands. We have our children and their children in our hands. We have the whole world in our hands. That's a midrash already on a song that was, he has the whole world in his hands. But we are the people and the beings who have the whole world in our hands.
I love this. So I want to, yes, Phyllis, yes, I say, I want to give you the last word before we hop into breakouts. Yes.
I just want to add a little bit more about the Iftar Seder. So
Please.
I think everybody, all Jews know that one of the most complex conversations in every synagogue is around Israel and Palestine. And likewise, I would imagine in most masjids, the same thing is true. The idea of the Iftar Seder is very much like the idea of the Freedom Plate, that when we have a chance to know one another personally, not just politically, not just our histories, you have to be open to hear the story of somebody's history. You have to, how do you get open is really the question. And the main way that we get open is by seeing one another as human beings. So when Muslims and Jews get together, and particularly when it's not just dependent upon the two people who you're interviewing tonight, but really everybody who's there getting to talk in small groups with one another and getting to see each person as a real person, a human being just like me, not without flaws, then we begin to have a place in us to hear things we may not have ever been able to take in before. And that's really why we're doing the Iftar Seder this year. We're not addressing Israel and Palestine. We're addressing the ways in which we as people, American people, face some of the crises of this time. But the purpose beyond everything is what happens in the small groups, in the people getting to know one another.
Man.
So you had the word meaningful in your opening, Rebecca, and that's really what we're about. We want for a Seder to be meaningful. If you'd ask the question, what's your favorite part of the Haggadah? It's the part that's not scripted. It's the part that comes spontaneously as people speak about their own lives.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to create.
I love that. So we're going to now invite everybody to get to have the conversation. And you know what? I'm going to invite folks. So we're going to move everybody into breakout rooms. You'll get the invitation in just a moment. And you'll have about 10 minutes in there, and we'll come back together for Q&A. But the sort of the questions to share with each other, you can introduce yourselves and speak about, you can speak about what your favorite part of the Haggadah is, but if you also want to talk about either a meaningful or a challenging Seder or Passover experience, and also what liberation means to you. So really, easy, easy topics. So I'm just gonna open up those rooms right now, and we'll call you back in a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you both. That was a brilliant segue.
And it was unplanned.
Yeah, right? We do this so well. I'm going to pause recording. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a wonderful conversation with each other in the breakout rooms. I'm going to take myself off the spotlight. And since we are a small group, folks can either sort of, if you want to share, if you want to unmute yourselves and share something about what you discussed in the chat. And also, if you have questions for Rabbi Berman and Rabbi Waskow, you can, I think, again, we're a small enough group, feel free to unmute yourselves. But if you prefer to type your questions or feedback into the chat, you can do that as well. And we'll read that on your behalf.
There's a hand.
I'd like to, unfortunately, I have another meeting in 15 minutes. So and Arthur, I emailed you this question earlier today. I don't know if you saw it. You didn't see, I emailed both of you in response to the invitation to be here today. And that is, I've always in my adult life used an alternative Seder, and so much of your guys' stuff is in my Seder. My late husband wasn't Jewish, so I try to make it inclusive and environmental. And now I have nobody Jewish to invite to my Seder, but I'm doing it anyway because my friends love me and support me in this. So I'm just wondering if you have any ideas or suggestions, knowing, your own kind of direction that goes through your Haggadahs and the kind of references to make. What would you add about the experience of the COVID pandemic? Is that too big a question to ask?
No, there are really two questions that have arisen. One is about COVID, the other one is about Ukraine. Let me answer the Ukraine one first. There's in the Passover story, at the last minute, when Pharaoh says, go away, you're just trouble. The next morning he wakes up and he can't stand it. He's so addicted to his own power that he can't stand letting people go free. So what does he do? He sends the army. And that climax to the story is what we're seeing again. And if I were doing the Seder now, and I will probably say something about that climax to the story. The Muslim story of the Exodus has one important difference from the Bible's version. And that version in the Quran is that at the last second, Pharaoh does tshuva. And there's a big debate among Muslim scholars about whether it can be real when you're at the point of death. But I think that vision of Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the world as it should be. It's like the Song of Songs in a different area. The world as it should be, even the worst criminal should get to do tshuva. And I don't know if Mr. Putin has even imagined, but I would want to say, I don't expect it, but I am willing to hope for it. I don't expect it, but I'm willing to hope for it. So the other question you asked, there's a wonderful reading we just finished, right, about diseases and how to deal with them. And the Torah portion has this incredibly detailed, conscious and expert set of prescriptions about how to deal with a skin disease that in Hebrew is called tzarad, and most translations say leprosy, but it ain't leprosy. And then there's a Haftarah where a foreigner, a well-known general, evidently, he's told by a Hebrew maidservant that she knows about a prophet back in Israel who is really good at curing people. He should go. So he goes. And the first thing that happens is the king says, he's just trying to get me in trouble because we won't be able to cure him, and then he'll have an excuse to make war against us. So it's another story about war and like that, right? And then the prophet grabs him and says, forget the king. I'll tell you what to do. Just go dip in the Jordan River 7 times. And the general says, come on, I'm a big guy. There ought to be a big ceremony, big enough to deal with me. You're telling me this simple little thing, just go dip in the Jordan? And his servants say, hey, boss, cool it, cool it. He's just telling you something simple. If he had told you something big, you would have done it. Tells you something simple, do it. So, all right. He goes dips in the Jordan 7 times, and he's cured. Would you believe? And the Haftarah is a direct critique of the Torah. It's a direct critique of all this planning and explicit, do this. And it cuts through. So I don't know if it's about COVID, but it's about being hooked, hooked truly, unable to get out of all the details of how to live a life, as to how to break through the details and go for the simple possibilities. So that's one thing I would say about it. And it may be, I certainly did all the vaccines and all that stuff, and I'm happy I did, and I think I'm healthier because I did. But there's something about the simple as well. And I think you have to read both the Torah portion and the Haftarah, the prophetic portion, in order to get the wholeness of life.
So again, those are wonderful textual bases to get either COVID or the Ukraine into your Seder. I would still use the freedom plate and invite all the people who were there to talk about what for them was slavery for these last 2 years, being shut in experience.
And
what for them, was freedom.
Right.
And from there,
that's also textual because, as you know, I think as you just said tonight, but you certainly know that the traditional Haggadah says in every generation, every human being, doesn't say every Jew, it says every human being, Kol Adam, must act as if we come forth from slavery to freedom in our own generation. So that even the freedom plate has its roots in that text.
And certainly when we bring together a group of people, I'd like to know what this experience has been like for them. And what happens when people share their own experiences is something shifts in the room. Relationships get formed even if there are strangers at the table. And it becomes a meaningful ritual, this Seder.
Yeah, I will also put in the chat, just since you raised it, we produced just yesterday, a Seder supplement. This is not a Haggadah, but a collection of images and poetry and readings about Ukraine, some of which already had lived on our site through our partners at Hyas, and other pieces that are new for this year. I'll also put on, we have a webinar on Tuesday afternoon that is with Hyas and Paideia, which is an organization based in Stockholm. And that is learning about sort of that topic of how we can welcome refugees at our Passover Seder, and also getting an update on what is happening both in Ukraine and among other European communities, European Jewish communities that are welcoming some of these refugees. I just want to put that out there as other things, but I'll stop and open it up for any other questions. We've got a few more
Becca, I have a question for you.
Oh, yes, please.
So do you have in Ukraine how to ask the 4 questions? It's one of the questions that's been asked in our Rabbinic Association.
I will look around and see. If not, you know what, that's a great idea, and I know who I can ask. So if I don't have it on the site, I will ask someone who works with this organization called Project Kesher, which is an organization for women and girls in the Ukraine. So if anybody's going to have it, it's Karen. So I will find out and try to include it. I'll either email it to you, or if anybody else is interested, you can always send us an email. I think Michael may have had a question.
I have a thought. I'm a photographer, and recently I discovered the negatives that my grandfather made in Ukraine before they came to this country. And they're gorgeous looking people, just handsome, handsome people. And it looked different than how we are here. It looked like they were with each other in every possible way. And those pictures are so valuable for me just to look at and see, you know, what their friends looked like and how they treated each other. They had nothing, you know, they had nothing, but it didn't matter. So I'm learning about my own family now as a result of what's going on in Ukraine.
You know, there's a book about Eastern European Jewry. Its title is Life is with People, which is what you just said. I don't know if you even remember that you said they were with each other.
Yes, yes, yes.
Can you say the name of that book again? Life is with People?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Judy, you had spoken about having all of your friends, none of whom are Jewish, who are going to come to your Seder. One of our daughters-in-law is Chinese, and our niece created a Seder plate with Hebrew, Chinese, and English on it. And when her parents have come and made Seder with my son and daughter, our daughter-in-law, they have this absolutely beautiful experience with very little language that goes across the lines that they can all participate in together. So you're reminding me about that.
Just want to say I've got one of the people coming is Catholic, and I just said to her, I just want to warn you, you will not be attending anything that is really a traditional Jewish Seder. And I said, and I said, the one example I'll give you is that, you know, at the very end of a traditional Seder, we say, next year in Jerusalem. I said, we won't be saying that in my Seder. So
In the Earth and Justice Seder on the Exodus Alliance.org website, we begin around the greens of spring. And one of the greens we talk about is the palms of the first Palm Sunday march, which is what it was. It was a demonstration that started on the hill on the Mount of Olives and walked into the city chanting psalms of protest. And Ki Li'olam Chasdo, it tells what psalm it was. And in the story told by Luke, the Gospel of Luke, the conservatives started yelling at Jesus to tell him to make his followers stop chanting. And he said, If they would be silent, the very stones would speak. So what we did in the Seder was to say, today, the very stones are speaking. The glaciers are weeping as they melt. The coral reefs are crying as they die. The mountains of West Virginia are screaming as their tops are sheared off to get cheap coal. The very stones are speaking, so we had better. So we turn, and that's the first day of what Christians call Holy Week, right? The Palm Sunday March. So we integrated that into the Seder, just as we integrated that vision in the Quran that even Pharaoh can make tshuva, can do tshuva. So it's a we get it that this urging for freedom goes over and over again. That's why the song, Go Down Moses, that's why that's in there too.
Thank you.
Be sure before we get
Yes,
off
we'll say one more thing. Yes, please.
that I want to introduce Rabbi Nancy Fuchs Kramer, who is with us, one of the people who has created the Iftar Seder that we're going to be celebrating this Sunday night.
Oh, wonderful. Hello. So glad you could be here. We'll share the link to that event in our follow-up. We'll have a recording of this webinar to share with you all tomorrow.
Great.
And just thank you so much. I just want to in closing, just offer deep thanks to all of you for joining us tonight, and tremendous thanks to Rabbi Arthur Waskow, Rabbi Phyllis Berman for just sharing your Torah with all of us tonight, and also
Thank you, Haggadah, for bringing together the profusion of Haggadah Seders that people have created this last 50 years and brought them together so people can draw on them and mix them and do all kinds of things with them that I would never have imagined.
Yes, you can have a Schitt's Creek Freedom Seder with a bit of Earth Justice and everything else in between. There's a new Golden Girls Haggadah if you just want to have a very different kind of Seder too. But you're right. I think the mixing and matching is probably one of my favorite parts as well.
Maybe Michael will send some of these photographs from his family from Ukraine, and that will be another kind of Seder.
Yeah, I will put in the chat. This is our email. If anybody ever has any questions, you can email us. And yes, Carol, great idea. You can save the chat by going to the 3 dots. And thank you, Rin, for the Golden Girls Haggadah. And I just want to just close by also thanking Rin for her help tonight, and to thank all of you again, and wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Hag Sameach.
Thank you.